What's going on? Theo Gremminger, player profiler here, and I'm talking about the NFL Combine, and I'm going to give you 12 winners from this NFL Combine, and what a combine it was. We had 8 wide receivers run faster than a 4.40. We had a number of running backs boost their NFL draft stock, and we actually had the tight end position, a position that besides Brock Bowers has had a lot of question marks, walk away with a number of players running a 4.65 40 or less. This NFL Combine was a big positive for us in fantasy football. Our rookie picks in Dynasty are now worth more thanks to some of these performances that we saw in Indianapolis. And before we talk about the winners, let's talk about a couple of guys who were honorable mention. They had amazing performances, but they were already kind of there with the draft stock. And that's Ladd McConkey. And Ladd McConkey, what a ascent he's had since Mobile and the Senior Bowl. Runs a 4.39 40-yard dash. This was the 6th best time among all wide receivers in this draft class. Anybody who thought Ladd McConkey, yeah, that guy can run routes, but he's a 4.5 guy, that went out the window. Had a 36-inch vertical leap. He had a 10.4 on the broad jump. I think that Ladd McConkey is a first-round pick in the NFL draft. And we're going to stay in the SEC for another player that just missed this article and video. And you can check out the article version of this video on playerprofiler.com, where I wrote about my winners at the NFL Combine. But it's Brian Thomas Jr. And Brian Thomas Jr. at Player Profiler, we already had him very high up in our rookie rankings, and we already projected him to be a first-round pick. But I think he's locked himself into top 20 NFL draft capital. Talking about a guy who measured in at 6'3", well over 200 pounds, runs a 4.33 40-yard dash. So we knew he was fast. He backed it up in Indianapolis with a 4.33 40. This was the 3rd fastest time among all wide receivers. He had a 38.5-inch vertical, and he had a 10.6 broad jump. And he chose to participate in the bench press drill, which was like a little bit out of nowhere because a lot of wide receivers opt out of this drill, and he put up 11 reps on the bench, which is a solid number for a wide receiver with his sort of height. So Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey, those guys definitely had strong combines. But let's talk about the 12 players that we want to focus on for this video. My 12 NFL Combine winners. And when you talk about NFL Combine winners in fantasy football, you got to start with Trey Benson. What a performance from Trey Benson. This was something to be very excited about for fantasy football purposes. Benson was a player that we wanted to see test well in terms of the 40-yard dash and show us that elite speed that we believed that he had. And boy, did he. He weighed in at 216 pounds, which was another win for him, and runs a 4.39 40-yard dash. When you start comparing 215-pound backs that run in that 4.38, 4.39 range, you hit on some tremendous success stories for fantasy football and for NFL draft capital. You get Jonathan Taylor, who was a little bit heavier, runs a 4.39. You get Breece Hall, about the same size as Trey Benson, runs a 4.39, and you get Ken Walker, about the same size, runs a 4.38. All 3 of those players ended up being second-round draft picks in the NFL draft. All 3 of those players have had a lot of fantasy success, and I think Trey Benson is well on his way to joining those guys as second-round NFL draft picks. Benson was the first Florida State Seminole to run for 200 yards in a game since Dalvin Cook. And I think he's going to end up with similar draft capital to Dalvin Cook and also Cam Akers, 2 former Florida State running backs who ended up being second-round picks in the NFL draft. Huge winner this past week. Let's stay at the running back position. Let's stay in the South, but let's go from Florida State in the ACC over to Tennessee in the SEC with Jaylen Right. And this was a player that we knew was going to be fast. Jaylen Wright is absolute lightning, but he backed it up big time at the NFL draft. He had a 4.38 40-yard dash at 210 pounds. He also had one of the fastest 10-yard splits among all running backs at the combine. The 10-yard split shows how fast you are for the first 10 yards of the 40-yard dash. Jaylen Wright crushed it, much like Trey Benson. He has a plus 110 speed score, which is a weight-adjusted 40. It's a big indicator of draft capital and future fantasy success. Jaylen Wright rushed for 1,000 yards in the SEC last season. He's 20 years old, and he has the sort of athleticism that NFL teams crave. He's going to be drafted on day 2, and he's the best Tennessee Volunteer running back since Alvin Kamara. I think that Jaylen Wright could end up being used, not the same player, but being used in the same way as Devon Achane. This is a guy that we really want to draft on our fantasy teams, has a ton of potential. Let's pivot over to the wide receiver position with a player that was already locked in, but what a performance of the combine. Rome Odunze. And Rome Odunze from Washington, this is a player that we've been projecting as a possible top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and he solidified it with his performance in Indianapolis. Looked every bit the part of an alpha wide receiver 1. He measured in at 6'3", weighed 212, runs a 4.45 40-yard dash, which was more than enough for NFL teams. I think he could have ran even a 4.5 and people would have still been happy at 6'3", 212 with his sort of production. 4.45 is an exclamation point for his NFL draft stock. He is a wide receiver 1 at the next level. He may be a dynasty wide receiver 1 already, just like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors in this incredible class. And he's the kind of player who could receive a 25% target share early on in his career, possibly as early as his rookie season. What a performance from Rome Odunze. And we're going to stick around at the wide receiver position with Xavier Worthy. And he was probably, arguably, the winner of the entire NFL Combine. And how could he not be? You're talking about a player who broke the record for the 40-yard dash. So we knew he was fast, but he's fast. Xavier Worthy is fast. He is lightning fast. Sets an NFL record with a blazing 4.21 40-yard dash. And then he posts the 4th highest vertical leap among all wide receivers. He only weighed in at 165, but based on his metrics, it doesn't really matter. He is going to be the next low BMI wide receiver to be selected in the first round after we've seen Devonta Smith, after we've seen Jordan Addison, and after, although he was a 3rd round pick, after we saw Tank Dell absolutely crush it his rookie season. Xavier Worthy is going to be a top 20 selection in the NFL draft. All those people saying Xavier Worthy is going to go 32 overall to Kansas City are not paying attention. This player is not going to be on the board when Kansas City picks at 32. You can bank on that one. And Xavier Worthy was not the only Texas Longhorn to have an unbelievable NFL Combine. And we'll stick at the wide receiver position with Adonai Mitchell. And Adonai Mitchell tore it up in Indianapolis. This is a player who we've really liked in the process. This is a guy who, if you check out some of my other videos, I had ranked very highly in wide receiver rankings. But I did not expect him to run a 4.35 40-yard dash at 6'2", 205 pounds. He had, it's basically stunning speed. It's jaw-dropping speed. It's speed that maybe we didn't see at Texas, but hopefully will translate at the next level. I expected him in the 4.5s. He runs a 4.35. Wild times. Also gives you a 39.5-inch vertical. He's going to join Xavier Worthy. You will see 2 Texas Longhorn wide receivers selected in the first round. And if for whatever reason Adonai Mitchell falls out of the first round, he'll be gone within the first 10 picks of the second round. A very exciting player with his production, led Texas in touchdowns this past season, caught a touchdown for the last 3 years in the college football playoffs, 2 years at Georgia, 1 year at Texas, and then has this stunning NFL combine. Adonai Mitchell, I believe, will be a first-round pick, not only in your Dynasty Rookie Draft, but in the NFL Draft as well. We're going to stick at the wide receiver position with a player that's really been rising up since the Senior Bowl and had a ridiculously good NFL combine, and that's Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. And Pearsall tore it up. 42-inch vertical, had a 4.41 40-yard dash and a 10.9 broad jump. This is eye-opening athleticism. This makes Pearsall a day 2 lock, and I think he's going to end up being selected in the top 50 picks. I think he's going to be a second-round pick in the NFL draft. He's a little bit older as a prospect, but this is a player that had highlight reel catches for Florida this year. He actually caught passes from Jaden Daniels at Arizona State earlier in his career, and he ends the season with 965 receiving yards in the SEC. So he had some interesting production, but he has been an absolute skyrocketing player in the Senior Bowl and now at the Combine. Ricky Pearsall is going to be a second-round pick in the NFL draft. Massive combine for him. Now, we've talked about some running backs. We've talked about some wide receivers. Now it's time to talk about a tight end. And the one we've got to talk about, Theo Johnson. Best first name in the entire NFL draft in the set of prospects. Theo Johnson out of Penn State had one of the best performances we've seen from a tight end athletically, basically ever. He has the highest RAS score since 1987, and they started testing in 1987. So he has the highest RAS score ever recorded. 6'6", 259 pounds, great size, and has a 4.57 40 with a 39.5-inch vertical leap. Ridiculous numbers, insane numbers. We've seen multiple Penn State tight ends post great athletic numbers over the years. You talk about Mike Gesicki. You talk about Zach Kuntz, who was a faller last year, but still tore up the combine, was a Penn State transfer to Old Dominion. And then last year we saw Brenton Strange, a Penn State tight end, drafted in the second round. Theo Johnson, I think, is going to be a second or third round pick. NFL teams are going to love his size and athleticism. Now we've covered tight end. Why don't we talk about a quarterback that had a really, really, really strong performance in Indianapolis? And that's Michael Penix. And Penix is a player that led Washington to a dream season this year. They go undefeated in the regular season. They beat Oregon twice. They beat Texas, and Penix plays fantastic against Texas. Then the national championship happens, and he gets pretty much eaten up by Michigan. Not a great game for Penix. He was a player that was ascending and then sort of fell off a little bit. Had a chance to really tear it up at the Senior Bowl down in Mobile and had an okay performance, but he did a lot at the Combine. Roller coaster ride off season ends sort of in a very positive way. And of course, the process is not over. I'm sure he's still going to have his pro day. NFL teams are still going to be evaluating him. But I think that Michael Penix could be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. He had a very clean medical, and this is a player who had serious injuries when he was at Indiana before transferring to Washington. He measured in with a massive hand size, top 10 hand size all time. And you're going to say, Theo, why are we talking about hand size? NFL teams value hand size because they think that it's a good predictor of players able to produce in bad weather. He also had an incredible wingspan, and he had an incredible arm length, where Penix Jr. compares to Anthony Richardson in terms of his wingspan and his arm length. So you're talking about a really well-built, great size quarterback. And then he displayed some outstanding arm talent in a major way. He was arguably the most impressive quarterback during passing drills at the Combine. There's a chance that Penix could sneak into the first round. There's a couple teams in the back end of the first, like Tampa Bay, that could consider drafting him. There's also teams that could trade down and get their signal caller at the end of the first. And then if he does not go in the first, he's going to go in the early second. But I have him as quarterback 5 now. I think we could see 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round. And we're definitely going to have 6 quarterbacks off the board before pick 45 when you factor in the big 3 plus J.J. McCarthy plus Penix and also Bo Nix of Oregon, who also had a pretty strong NFL combine. And let's go back to the tight end position because Theo Johnson was not the only player to have a very strong NFL combine. We saw a number of guys, Jaheim Bell of Florida State. We saw Jared Wiley of TCU. But the tight end who's got me super excited, and I have as tight end 3 in this draft class, is Ben Sinnott of Kansas State. He had a strong Senior Bowl, and this is a player that led Kansas State in touchdown receptions, led Kansas State in touchdowns, had a very high ADOT for a tight end. He was being used downfield for Kansas State and goes to the combine. People liked him, but now I think that it's going to be a meteoric rise into possibly the second round in the NFL draft. He ran a faster 40 time than Jatavian Sanders with a 4.68 40, and he backed it up with a 40-inch vertical leap which led all tight ends. You're talking about a versatile player at Kansas State. He lined up all over the field for them, and I think he's going to get top 3 tight end draft capital in this class. 49 catches last year for the Wildcats. I think he's going to catch a lot of passes in the NFL. And if you're drafting an underdog best ball drafts right now, he's going off the board at tight end 32. I think Ben Sinnott could beat that by 10 spots. I think he's going to be a productive fantasy player right from the get-go as soon as he gets to the NFL. Let's go right back to the running back position, though. One player who we've got to discuss and is super duper exciting is Marshawn Lloyd. And Marshawn Lloyd's had a pretty interesting path. This is a player who is from Delaware, ends up going to high school in Hyattsville, Maryland at DeMatha, which is one of the best programs in the country for high school football, has a 2-hour commute each morning to get that exposure and does really well there, gets offered by all of the big schools in the country, the Georgias, ends up going to South Carolina, plays well at South Carolina, but ends up transferring last year to go play with his high school rival, Caleb Williams. He goes to from USC, South Carolina, to USC, Southern Cal. And Lloyd was a guy that we had in our top 8 running backs, top 7 running backs heading into the Senior Bowl. And Lloyd tore it up, put himself in contention to be the top running back selected in the NFL draft with his massive Senior Bowl performance. And then, much like Wright and much like Benson, Lloyd had a fantastic NFL combine. He's even heavier than Benson and heavier than Wright. You're talking about a player who is 220 pounds, and Marshawn Lloyd looks like a rocked up 220. Very well-built running back. And we like the size, but we love the speed. He had a 4.46 40-yard dash. This resulted in a 1:11 speed score, a very impressive number. That's about comparable speed score to guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson last year, to put that in perspective. He looked fluid and impressive in every single drill, and there's nothing but positive vibes with Marshawn Lloyd heading into USC's Pro Day. USC's Pro Day, there's going to be a ton of eyes naturally, because we're going to see Caleb Williams, we're going to see Brendan Rice, and we are going to see Marshawn Lloyd. If he has a massive day there, I think Marshawn Lloyd could sneak into the second round with Trey Benson and with Blake Corum, who ran a 4.53 and could have easily been discussed here. And one other player who I do not expect to be drafted highly by the NFL, but absolutely put himself on the radar for a lot of fantasy football managers and NFL teams, was Isaac Guerendo from Louisville. And a couple days ago, it was kind of like, who? But then Guerendo, who had 800 rushing yards for Louisville. This isn't some guy that was playing at some tiny school and didn't do anything. He had over 800 rushing yards for Louisville this year. He had 22 receptions for Louisville this year, but he put up a 125.7 speed score, which was one of the highest speed scores of all time. That's a similar speed score to like Saquon Barkley. He weighed in at 220 and he ran the 40 at 4.33 with a 41.5-inch vertical. Guarendo is not a guy that we want to bet on, but he is a player that we want to monitor and see where NFL teams take him. If they ignore him and he goes in like the 6th, 7th round, doesn't need to be a guy that you invest in heavily for Dynasty. But if he gets round 4, round 5 draft capital with those sort of athletic numbers and sort of coming out of nowhere, it means that an NFL team is betting on him, and we want to pay attention to that. So I would say he's one that you want to monitor. And the final big winner for me was Malik Washington. And Washington was a player that quietly dominated the Shrine Bowl. So while the Senior Bowl is going down in Mobile, the Shrine Bowl is going down in Texas, and Malik Washington was tearing it up there. This was a player that had a ridiculous season at UVA. He had 110 receptions for 1,426 yards, a mega producer at UVA. This is a guy who had a basketball background in high school and played quarterback in high school, ends up going to Northwestern, looks fine at Northwestern, but he was in an offense that really didn't pass the ball, made a stylistic transfer to go to UVA, and ends up putting up this ridiculous season. It was one of those seasons where you almost dismiss it because you have to say this is somewhat gimmicky if a guy's going to put up 110 receptions, 1,426 yards, sort of out of nowhere. But he was UVA's entire offensive game plan, and opposing defenses couldn't stop it. So he gets the slow drip at the Shrine Bowl, and then he puts up one of the better performances of all wide receivers at the Combine. He weighed in at 192 pounds, and he's only 5'8.5", but he's a very thick, well-built running back size player at 5'8", 192, sort of like a, we don't want to get crazy, but a mini Debo type frame. And he had a 42.5-inch vertical, which led all wide receivers. And he runs a 4.47 40-yard dash. I think that Malik Washington has played his way into day 2 of the NFL draft. A really exciting player with a ton of production and now a ton of athleticism, and put himself in a position to have really good draft capital. If you want to check out the article version of this video, check it out on playerprofiler.com. I am Theo Gremminger. Check out all of my shows right here on Player Profiler YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Dynasty Life, the Sonic Truth podcast, press coverage, First Class Fantasy, Futurecast. I'm all over the place. And I'm also putting videos like this all throughout the offseason. We're going to get you ready for the NFL draft. We're going to get you ready for free agency. We're going to get you ready to crush your dynasty leagues, crush your redraft leagues, crush your best ball leagues. We got you covered right here at Player Profiler. We'll see you soon.